I found out my husband was my twin. I ordered the DNA test for fun. It was supposed to be harmless, ancestry percentages, a map, maybe a distant cousin I'd never meet. My husband and I mailed our kits out around the same time and forgot about them. We'd been married for years. People sometimes said we looked alike, but it always sounded like one of those comments people make about couples who share the same style, the same habits, the same smile from being together too long. Weeks later, the results notification popped up. I opened mine casually, scrolling through the usual breakdown until I reached the relatives section. The page refreshed, sorted itself, and then my stomach dropped. The closest match listed wasn't distant. It wasn't vague. It wasn't an extended relative. It said the person was my sibling. I stared, waiting for the part where it would soften into something more reasonable. Some small print, some possible, some disclaimer that made it feel like a computer guessing. There was none. It sat there like a verdict. I refreshed. I closed the app. I logged back in. Nothing changed. My fingers went cold as I tapped into the profile connected to the match. A name I didn't recognize at first, but the last name sparked something I'd heard in pieces over the years: my husband's biological family, the adoption he rarely talked about, the records that were sealed, the gaps that were always explained away as complicated. My mind tried to protect me by offering simpler answers: a lab mix-up, a hacked account, a coincidence stacked on top of another coincidence. Then I opened my husband's results. And before I even scrolled, I saw my own profile sitting at the top of his list because the system had already connected us both ways. His closest match, his sibling. The room didn't change, but everything in it felt unfamiliar. Every memory rewound itself and replayed with a new edge. How quickly we'd felt comfortable, the strange ease of it, the way his face had felt familiar before I'd learned his story. I checked the details next, like maybe numbers and dates could rescue me. Same birth year, same hospital, same city. The timeline clicked into place with a sound I felt more than heard. Two babies born in the same place, separated into different lives, growing up unaware, finding each other again as adults and calling it love. I sat there with my phone glowing in my hands, realizing this wasn't just a discovery. It was evidence. And evidence meant there was a truth behind it: paperwork, choices, a trail of decisions made by adults who never expected the two kids at the center of it to meet again. My husband's car pulled into the driveway. I didn't close the app. I didn't move. Because somewhere out there was the person who could explain how this happened, and I knew exactly whose door I was going to knock on next. I didn't tell my husband what I'd found. Not that day. Not the next. I carried the knowledge with me like a second spine, something rigid and impossible to bend without breaking everything attached to it. I learned how to breathe around it, how to smile with it lodged behind my ribs, how to exist beside someone while knowing the foundation beneath us had already collapsed. The house felt different after that. Familiar rooms took on the quality of sets, like places built to resemble a life rather than actually contain one. I noticed things I had never paid attention to before: the way his expressions mirrored mine without effort, the way our habits overlapped naturally, not learned but instinctive. Things I once thought were signs of compatibility now felt like echoes. Sleep became unreliable. When it came, it brought fragmented images that didn't feel imagined: hospital ceilings, paper wristbands, the sense of being handled by strangers before language existed. I would wake up with my heart racing, not from fear, but from recognition I couldn't explain. I kept the test results open on my phone longer than I should have. I checked them constantly, as if repetition might weaken their certainty. I refreshed the page obsessively, hoping the system would soften its language or correct itself quietly in the background. It never did. The connection stayed exactly where it was, untouched by my denial. Sibling. The more time passed, the more obvious it became that this wasn't an error. Records don't align this cleanly by accident. Systems don't state things this directly unless the data behind them is overwhelming. And overwhelming data meant history, decisions, intent. Someone had known. That thought followed me everywhere: in grocery store aisles, in traffic, in moments of silence where my mind filled in the gaps on its own. Babies don't separate themselves. Lives don't diverge without help. This had required adults, planning, agreement. There was only one person left who could tell me how deep it went: My mother's house looked exactly the same as it always had, the same worn driveway, the same porch steps with the slight crack near the edge. Sitting there in my car, I realized how strange it was that I had never questioned my origin story. It had been presented to me as complete, even though so many details were always brushed past. Dates spoken quickly, explanations delivered vaguely, certain questions discouraged with familiarity. I went inside carrying years of trust and minutes of certainty. I didn't soften anything. I laid the evidence out in front of her: the test, the match, the hospital, the timing, the overlap that no longer allowed for coincidence. At first, she tried to hold herself together. Her face remained still in a way that suggested practice, control built over decades. But as the reality settled in, something shifted. What surfaced wasn't anger or denial, it was exhaustion. The truth came out unevenly, not because she wanted to confess, but because she was finally tired of guarding it. She had been young, too young to feel like she had choices. Pregnant with twins she hadn't planned for and couldn't explain away. The pregnancy complicated, watched closely, whispered about. Judgment came quietly, then loudly, then constantly. One baby had been planned for, the other had been a liability. A doctor had offered a solution that didn't feel like cruelty at the time: a private adoption, no shared records, no future contact. Clean separation. Two babies leaving the hospital under different names, into different lives, never meant to cross paths again. She told herself it was survival, that each child would have a chance, that she was sparing everyone involved from pain. What she hadn't accounted for was time. Years turned into decades. Technology changed, records digitized, DNA turned biological truth into searchable data. Secrets that once relied on distance and silence stopped staying buried. She admitted she had recognized him long before the test ever existed. From photos, from mannerisms, from the way standing next to him made something in her chest tighten. She had seen it, known it, and chosen not to stop it. She attended my wedding knowing exactly what it was, watched us exchange vows with a smile that carried decades of justification behind it, told herself that intervening would destroy two lives instead of just acknowledging the truth. Standing there, listening to the full shape of it, I realized something worse than betrayal. She hadn't just hidden the truth, she had participated in its consequences. When I left her house, nothing felt anchored anymore. Love didn't cancel out biology. Regret didn't undo decisions. Understanding didn't equal forgiveness. Some truths exist without offering relief. I still hadn't told my husband. That choice became its own weight, because now the truth belonged to him as much as it belonged to me. And unlike me, he had no history that hinted at it, no gradual unraveling, just a life waiting to be split open. The moment came without ceremony. No dramatic setting, no controlled environment. I told him everything at once because pacing it felt manipulative. I needed him to know the full truth the way I had learned it, abruptly, irreversibly. I watched comprehension fracture across his face in stages: confusion, disbelief, recognition, grief. The kind of grief that doesn't cry but hollows. The man I loved didn't vanish, but the future we shared did. It dissolved the moment the truth settled. There was no way forward together, no reframe that didn't involve denial. Staying would have required pretending the truth didn't exist, and pretending was the exact thing that had brought us here. We separated quietly, not because love disappeared, but because love couldn't survive being built on something this broken. Paperwork followed, lawyers, the slow dismantling of a life that had once felt inevitable. Friends didn't know what to ask, and the ones who tried didn't know where to stop. I moved away, started over somewhere unfamiliar enough that my reflection didn't feel like an accusation. For a long time, mirrors were unbearable. Every familiar feature felt borrowed. Every resemblance felt like proof of something I never consented to. I cut contact with my mother, not out of rage, but because proximity to her kept reopening questions that had no answers left. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. Some relationships only survive at a distance. Time passed the way it always does, indifferent and relentless. Months turned into years. Life rebuilt itself slowly, unevenly, around the damage. I learned how to exist without expecting closure, how to hold truth without needing it to resolve cleanly. I never took another DNA test. I never needed to, because the real result wasn't genetic. It was the understanding that fate isn't always destiny. Sometimes it's a decision made quietly, justified for decades, and paid for by people who never knew they were part of it. And sometimes, the most devastating part of discovering the truth isn't what it reveals. It's realizing how many people knew it long before you did.